Hello and welcome to FOCUS54, your weekly guide to real African news. I'm your host, Jeffrey Murimbechi, and every single week we give you a full 360 view of all the topical issues within the African continent. And in today's episode, we're looking at the recently held Zim-Botswana Bi National Commission and sustainability, emerging policies and the impact on the SADC region on the partnership that is being formed, its significance to the rest of the continent and economic growth, and most of all, what does this mean for you? We did see that the two presidents over the last, President Emmerson Mnangagwa and President Masisi of Botswana, we did see both presidents visiting each other's countries and outside showing how beautiful both countries are, from Nyanga all the way to the Okavanga Delta. There was a lot of smiles, there were a lot of handshakes and agreements that were signed, but then we get to the heart of the matter of what this agreement really means for both countries. Now also identify an additional mechanism to foster and find effective ways of implementing and monitoring this. Remember that both countries are still within electoral period. Zimbabwe just coming out of a very peaceful and fair election, which is now the epitome of what African countries should use as the golden standard for the elections. And Botswana is experiencing elections sometime this year, and we'll be telling you all about that. And in the second segment, I will be joined by Dr. Victor Maphosa, who will be helping us to dissect this matter and simplify this and tell us what this means for the nations, what this means for the region, what this means for companies, and what this means for the residents and citizens of both countries. But first of all, we start off with the news that is topical within Africa, and we start off with in East Africa, in Kenya, whereby a Kenyan company making sustainable textiles out of pineapple waste, of all things. Now, as the fashion industry worldwide is increasingly embracing more eco-friendly material, an initiative, an innovative product and a project from Kenya is turning leftover pineapple leaves into footwear. Pineapple's fiber has long been used, but it's labor intensive to produce, and it's also quite expensive to pay the labor cost, and until recently lost out in the era of cheap cotton and synthetics that have come up as future technologies or better technologies. Now, this idea of gaining global attention at the fashion industry and consumers' focus is increasingly on sustainability. Now, this project brings in extra revenue for the farmers, and it also creates jobs as people sort the leaves and extract the fibers, which in end dried, spun, and woven into textiles. Now we move to Nigeria, where there's not a single dull moment. I know earlier on in the week in our news, we did cover a story about how Nigeria's increased internet use is providing jobs for young people, with social media influencers earning hundreds of thousands and some turning into millionaires because of jobs that they're earning on the internet. But for now, we talk about Nigeria's health, and the health experts in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, have bemoaned the high mortality rate within the country, saying increased investment in material health will go a long way in improving chances of the survival of mothers and their babies in the country. Now, according to a report released by the World Health Organization, the WHO, Nigeria accounted for the second highest number of maternal and clinic deaths globally, with a very disturbing 540 deaths per thousand in the year 2020, involving women and children. And such numbers are very disturbing, and the World Health Organization and many other organizations are working towards turning that around. And before we end our look at what's happening in Africa, we turn to the DRC and Central Africa, where unrelenting rainfall wreaks havoc within the country. Now, authorities in the Central African Republic of the Congo are facing an unprecedented situation after the country suffered the worst flooding in 6 decades, induced by torrential rain in recent weeks, with people's livelihoods severely being affected as many residents are displaced from their homes. Now, if you look at a lot of documentaries, we have seen that in the thickest parts of the jungles of the Congo, they have been affected by the weather in the last few years, and climate change is reaping its is actually wreaking havoc within the region. And in as much as we are facing a drier part of climate change, rain has been at its worst in the last 60 years in the DRC. Now, heavy rains have caused a partial to total flooding in some of the country's farmlands and villages. And obviously, you know, residents will be affected in terms of displacement, and there will be some areas that will face famine, and they will need aid. Scientists believe that the floods and the heavy rains are a result of climate change, and are calling for global solutions to mitigate the impacts of adverse weather. This is the close of the first segment of Focus 54. Join us in the next segment when we talk about that topical issue of the bilateral relationship between Zimbabwe and Botswana. Welcome back to Focus 54, and like I did say, I'll be joined by an expert, and I'm joined by Dr. Victor Maphosa, who's in studio to help us discern the significance of the recently held Zimbabwe-Botswana Bi National Commission, and it was held quite recently, and its implications on the rest of the continent. Dr. Maphosa, good to have you on Focus 54 2024.
It's good to be here.
I did that intentionally because I knew that was rhyming. Now, let's get straight into Zimbabwe and Botswana. You know, having further gotten closer because of the relationship between the two administrations, the administration of President Mnangagwa and President Masisi. Now, you know, compared to predecessors, let's take it back to 2018. You know, the two countries entered into an agreement to establish Zimbabwe-Botswana Bi National Commission to promote and explore cooperation in various entities, from agriculture, food security, security itself, defense, energy, environment, health, and many more. How sustainable is this commission?
Well, it is. I don't think, like, speaking of in terms of the sustainability of the commission is the right way to put it. I would put it in terms of it's just a tool of just reinforcing the relationship that has existed between Zimbabwe and Botswana. It's at the realization that, you know what, we are one people, and we've been one people, and we're still going to be one people going forward. There's nothing that could separate us. So this is just the formalization of that relationship that has existed for a very long time. We are all one people, and we are now breaking the colonial barriers and the colonial borders and these colonial distinctions and labels that had been put on us for so long. So I believe the commission going forward it's not necessarily to speak of it in terms of the commission as the one that determines the relations between the two countries, but I think the shared history and the realization that we're one people is what is the most important aspect that is going to make sure that this relationship lasts for a very long time to come.
This is a huge milestone with a neighbor. Why is it happening now, and what stopped or hindered it from happening previously?
I think it all goes back to timing. The timing has been perfect. Remember, in the past few years since President Mnangagwa came into office, he's been very vocal, and he's been working hard towards engaging and re-engaging. And when most people hear engaging and re-engaging, they immediately think maybe Europe, the UK, China, but we also should be engaging and re-engaging with our neighbors and strengthening our relationships. And now that it is pretty clear that no one is coming to save us, especially in Africa, we're on our own, I think there's now the realization that, you know, we need to reinforce those relationships that have existed between us. And like I said, the realization that we are one people. So the timing is perfect. And I'm pretty sure it's also to do with the fact that President Masisi and President Mnangagwa seem to be on the same wavelength in terms of their approach to governance, and their plans and intentions for these two nations going forward, which was not the case with the previous administration of former President Khama and former President Mugabe. They didn't seem to be that good relationship, a fluid relationship between the two.
So now you've mentioned that relationship, and let's go back in the last 5 years. The two countries, what shared policies or strategies have emerged in the last 5 years? Because I know an agreement is signed now, but there must have something positive leading up to this.
Well, the whole idea, it's been premised on to improve relations, cooperation, and ensure that there's mutual benefits between this relationship that these two countries have been entering into. So mostly it's been to do with spurring the economies, and especially on issues, on areas that we interrelate, and economic areas such as the agricultural sector, the mining sectors. Botswana has been far ahead of us in terms of mining diamonds. They've been doing it for quite a long time, so we could borrow a leaf from them. In terms of agriculture, we have been for the longest period of time the leading country on the African continent in terms of agriculture, and they can also learn a thing or two from us there. So in terms of what comes to mind quickly are those areas, especially the economy and agricultural production and mining. Those are the areas that are quite leading in terms of cooperation and the strategy between the two countries going forward.
Let's get into the politics of each country. Zimbabwe held a very peaceful and fair election last year, which many now seem to use as the template of what an African election should be like. Botswana's got an election coming through. We saw, the chief electoral officer of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, Mr. Twile Slaigwana, speaking to ZBC and speaking to our news team and everyone about a collaborative effort in us being an observer, or I would say, an influence in the Botswana election. Can you tell us a little bit more about their election and how we as Zimbabweans have inspired them to copy what we've done?
Look, the election in Zimbabwe in 2023, our recently ended harmonized election, was quite a turning point. It was quite a milestone in that we proved, in the midst of adversity, in the midst of attacks, in the midst of propaganda, in the midst of a lot of fake and falsehoods being peddled, that this election was not going to be free and fair, but we proved to the whole world that we can conduct a perfect election. That election was almost flawless in as far as an election can be, except obviously for the attacks that we were receiving from our detractors, and that sort of try and put a dent on the election. So what then it was it became a marvel to these other African countries and said, no, look, Zimbabwe has done a good thing in spite of all these attacks that are coming from all angles. They've managed to conduct a free and fair and flawless election. And then it was a realization that, no, you know what, we can conduct elections in our own way without having to necessarily copy word for word how the Europeans and the Westerners do their elections. Like, that election proved that, we can do elections in our own way and have them meet all and tick all the boxes of what a democratic election should be. And we did that, and we did that well. Now it's a realization that all these countries that have elections coming up this year now want to come and learn a thing or two from Zimbabwe on how exactly we did it and how they can also conduct elections that can be done in such a flawless manner.
Now, politically speaking, you've really clarified the bilateral relations in terms of elections between Zimbabwe and Botswana. We have South Africa, which is also about to get into an election. It's their election year as well. Why are so many countries now trying to engage with Zimbabwe at a very public and open forum with so many MOUs and so many agreements being signed?
Well, like I've said, Zimbabwe has always been the leader in almost different aspects, be it politically, economically, and we were the first to do the land reform. We took our land, and we've been realizing benefits of that. Almost every Zimbabwean has got access to land somewhere, and countries such as South Africa also have plans to do that. And it's just a coincidence that the elections were just recent, and there's a spate of a number of elections coming up in Africa in the coming months. So this is an opportunity now that these countries are seizing to say, no, you know what, Zimbabwe has got a unique way of doing things, and I think it's the best moment that we can learn to learn to do things the way Zimbabweans do things. And that's why we have so many countries now reaching out to us and trying to learn a thing or two from us.
Well, Doc, on that note, we take a short break, and as we lead up to the third segment, but you've heard it from what Dr. Maphosa is saying. It's all about the bilateral relations between Zimbabwe and Botswana. And we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritties on what this means for businesses, what this means for individuals between the two countries, and ultimately what this will mean for the rest of the continent. This is Focus 54. Stay tuned for the third segment. Welcome back to the third and final segment of Focus 54. We are talking to Dr. Maphosa, who's been discussing with us and, making, I'll say, simplifying the very landmark and I think game-changing bilateral relationships between Zimbabwe and Botswana, with the Zim-Botswana Bi National Commission and its agreements being signed. Now, growing up, a lot of Zimbabweans have always traded with Botswana, small goods. Zimbabwe, people from Botswana have been trading with Zimbabweans, and the issue of visas has always been an issue from previous administrations to now. With this agreement being signed, is there further affirmation of the visa-free deal between the two countries?
Well, this is a small step towards the free movement of goods and people across the African continent. This is just but a small step of what the entire continent is trying to do. And Zimbabwe and Botswana, like, you know what, this is the perfect opportunity for us to take the lead and show an example that our people are one. We should do away with these colonial barriers and have our people move freely, be it all the way from Cape to Cairo. I mean, Europe has been using the same model for the longest time now. You can freely move across Europe without any visa requirements. So why should we Africans stick to being restricted in terms of movement between people across our countries and across the continent? So it's just them setting the example to say, you know what, this is the good thing that we should be doing, and we should make sure that there is free movement of our people and goods between our two countries.
Our president, President Emmerson Mnangagwa, is in Dubai and the United Emirates for the World Summit, and there have been talks of some elements such as abolishing double taxation. Do you think this could also be something that traders and those in business could benefit from the bilateral relationship between Zimbabwe and Botswana? If you get taxed in one country, you don't have to get taxed in both countries at the same time. Are those kind of agreements feasible in terms of stimulating trade between the two countries?
Yes, those kind of agreements are what is now the gold standard, and they are mostly anchored on the bilateral relations that exist between two countries. And as the relationship between Zimbabwe and Botswana improves, we are most likely to see similar frameworks and similar agreements and similar policies and laws and regulations being enacted, because the idea is to promote trade, the idea is to promote economic growth for two countries, and anything that can work to that effect will be and might be used and adopted.
Just to name a couple of the ministers that were part of the delegation that went to Botswana, Minister of Finance, Minister of ICT, health ministers, and many more. What else should be fostered within the agreement so that we have the sustainability of the agreement, and to have effective implementation and monitoring of the systems that will be put in place?
I think every sector of the economy, every sector of Zimbabwe's economy, and it will include all ministries. So I think this delegation was just but a start, a small delegation to see, like, you start small and you start expanding. So I think that what they took now are the key ministries that are going to be leading the drive. But going forward, we should be seeing, I think, a whole lot of ministries involved and a whole lot of sectors involved in this agreement and this commission.
Now, speaking economically, there's the vast difference between Zimbabwe and Botswana in terms of our GDP, in terms of our territory size, arable land size, areas with water. Our demography is different, geology is different. We are also at different developmental stages. What recommendation would you give to make sure that we avert challenges in areas of divergent national interests?
Well, I think what we should, I won't look at it at divergent national interests. I'll look at it as complementing each other. Whatever differences and shortfalls are between the other should be complemented by the other. We have more arable land, they have less, and so forth. So we should be looking at areas of strength and areas of less strength that each one of us has, and then we should be now working towards ensuring that what they lack, we can also assist, and what we lack, they can assist.
In terms of population, I would say that Botswana looks like the biggest beneficiary in this agreement in terms of a market. I mean, their population of plus or minus 2 million, and we are plus or minus 14 million. Anyone who manufactures in Botswana now has a huge market. Is it as it seems in layman's terms, or there's something deeper?
No, not necessarily. Populations do not necessarily determine consumption and which country has got an advantage in terms of trade. Look at, for instance, Singapore, one of the largest exporters in the world. They're a small country, but they export more. They also import more. Look at the UAE. They're pretty much an economy based on importations, but that they've got a significant population there. So it's not necessarily to say it's all in black and white. That's why we are having these commissions and having these meetings to see how best then can each country benefit more. And I wouldn't put it in a way to say Botswana will benefit more or Zimbabwe will benefit more. I would rather say that we are all going to benefit from this bilateral agreement and these bilateral commissions.
And then lastly, Doc, before we let you go, the whole of Africa is watching us. A huge spotlight on these two countries, powerhouses and giants within the region. What can the rest of Africa learn from this bilateral commission?
Like I said, we're still at a stage where we're doing bilateral commissions, but this is a model that can be implemented to be multilateral and involve a lot of countries as we're trying to free up trade and free up the movement of goods and free up the movement of people across the African continent. So this is an example of what we should be doing with all of the countries across the African continent. So we should be focusing going forward more on less bilateral commissions and more multilateral commissions. But this is the perfect opportunity to say, like, this works, and what better opportunity than to start on a bilateral relation and have that have so many countries join going forward.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for clarifying that. And I think if I was to summarize everything, I'll say this is the beginning of better days to come and more development. And hopefully that this bilateral agreement will become a multinational agreement. Thank you so much, Doctor, for that. And that wraps up this edition of Focus 54. Do give us your thoughts and comment on our Facebook page, ZBC News Online. My name is Jeffrey Murimechi. Catch me next week on the same segment.